Hello, people! Once again, it's me, Ewaenruwa Nomaren, and this is my channel, It Pays to Fear God. In this channel, we learn about God, His beloved Son, Jesus Christ, and their kingdom purpose, the three most important subjects that we can ever learn about, talk about, or discuss in the entire Holy Bible, according to John chapter 17, verse 3. The subject that I have prepared for you listeners and also myself today is captioned Welcoming Wise Counsel. However, before I get into that, we are once again going to hear a tune that some of us might enjoy listening to, and while that tune is playing, you can go ahead and subscribe and also click the notification bell so that you can be the first to come when we make future sermons just like this. Once again, the subject that I have prepared for you and myself today is captioned Welcoming Wise Counsel. Counsel or advice, as of course I will be using those two words interchangeably today, is essentially guidance or recommendations that we offer to make prudent future action. And the Bible has told us, and it is in fact practical knowledge, that advice is good. In Proverbs chapter 20 verse 18, for example, King Solomon had stated, "Every purpose is established by counsel, and with good advice make war." In Proverbs chapter 16 verse 22, King Solomon had also stated, "Understanding is a wellspring of life unto him that hath it, but the instruction of fools is folly." And in Proverbs chapter 11 verse 14, King Solomon had also stated, "Where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors is safety." See also Proverbs chapter 15 verse 22. Yeah, the book of Proverbs is a lot about being wise, and a part of being wise is taking counsel from people. However, we have to understand some more things about advice. First of all, some more details on what advice is, who should be the one giving it and who should be the one taking it, and how we should welcome it if we can't, how we go about doing it, and the benefits that go about doing so. And the first thing I'm going to be starting off with today is talking about who should be giving advice and who should be taking it, because it is a common problem among Christians. Everybody wants to be the one giving the advice, but nobody wants to be the one to take it. But the Bible has used the hierarchy of obedience to help us understand the fact that there are certain people who are more prone to be taking the advice, and there are people who are prone to be giving the advice more often. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3, we see that idea, the people who should be giving it and the people who should be taking it. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. See also Ephesians chapter 5 from verses 22 to 24, and chapter 6 from verses 1 to 3, talking about children obeying their parents, quoting Exodus chapter 20 verse 12, as that is one of the 10 commandments. The Bible has never sold the idea that children should be advising their parents, though of course in the last days with all the things that are happening, children going to courts and stuff to be telling people what they should be doing, that's going on. If you read Isaiah chapter 3 verse 12, also verse 4, and 2 Timothy chapter 3 from verses 1 to 5, and even Micah chapter 7 verse 6. Wives want to be the ones to advise their husbands, like Job's wife was telling her husband, like an advice, to curse God and die. And of course, Job did not take such advice, which is something I'm going to get to later. But the general idea is that the hierarchy of obedience applies when we should be taking advice and when we should be the one to give the advice. Elders are generally people who are looked up to give advice because of their general wisdom and understanding and the experience that they have in the world. And as a result, if we read 1 Timothy chapter 5, we come to see that idea, the fact that elders, because they're older, they should be respected. Pastors, because of the job that they do, we should take their advice. If we read Hebrews chapter 13 and verses 7 and 17, because Jesus Christ is the head of the church, pastors and people who generally lead churches, even the bishops at that time, they were supposed to be taking advice from Jesus Christ. If we read Ephesians chapter 5 verse 23, Colossians chapter 1 verse 18, etc. And there are many more levels to the hierarchy of obedience. In fact, it just stretches on and on and on. But we have to understand the fact that when we come to God's house, when we come to worship God, we have to be taking advice from God, and there are other levels of the hierarchy of obedience. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 1. And the disciples of Jesus Christ have been advised by God, because of Jesus Christ's wisdom from heaven, to listen to him. If we read Matthew chapter 17 verse 5. It's very important that we keep this in mind. But the hierarchy of obedience doesn't always apply. And you know why? It's because of Job chapter 32 in verses 9 and 8. Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. But there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. The influence of Satan the devil and of God himself doesn't necessarily just fit in the hierarchy of obedience, because there are elders who would ideally be the ones looked up to for advice, but for various reasons, whether it be from the influence of Satan the devil or from general weaknesses, they can't be looked up to nor trusted because they don't really have any given advice to give. And there are other levels of the hierarchy of obedience that, because of Satan the devil's influence, can kind of get messed up. And if we're true children of God, we have to be able to use our spiritual justice to judge, therefore, the advice that they give. Because sometimes people who we would expect to give good advice don't. An example was the story of Jethro and Moses. Moses was like the judge at that time because everybody knew that God was with him. If you read Exodus chapter 3, that was where God chose him to do the work of leading the Israelites from Egypt to Canaan. And everybody knew that. So because of that, he would be the judge, like the Supreme Court. Every single case would be brought to him. And of course, because there were millions of people in the land of Egypt, that came with some drawbacks. Mainly, he didn't have much time for his family, didn't have much time for many other things that were important nonetheless, but because of all the judging that he had to do, there was no time to do any of those things. But Jethro, who, even though being Moses' father-in-law, never really had as much understanding, spiritual understanding, as Moses, of course, had, he rendered an advice by saying, Moses, why don't you set up other courts and organize things so that you don't have to be the one judging everything? You can have local courts, local stuff, so that other people can be doing the lower judging, and then you judge the real stuff if there are big stuff going on that require a high amount of spiritual understanding. And like I said, even though Moses had a better amount of spiritual justice and judgment than Jethro, his father-in-law, he still took the advice because he processed it and he realized it was quite reasonable. We should never take bad advice. If we read Proverbs chapter 1 from verses 10 to 12 and verses 15 and 16, where King Solomon had stated, My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, Come with us, let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. We must never take the advice of the wicked, because God is going to destroy that advice. If we read Psalms chapter 33 in verses 10 and 11, David the psalmist had stated, "The Lord bringeth the counsel of the heathen to naught. He maketh the devices of the people of none effect. The counsel of the Lord standeth forever, the thoughts of his heart to all generations." And if we also read Proverbs chapter 19 verse 21, it talks about the same idea. The counsel of God Almighty stands, but the counsel of humanity that is contrary to God's advice is going to be destroyed by God. The way Ahithophel's advice that was given to Absalom to create a plot, structure a way to kill David was brought down, and Absalom was killed in the process. David the psalmist had prayed for God to take root and destroy such advice. If we read 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 31, and we see how that happened in chapter 17 from verses 1 to 29. And because Ahithophel's advice wasn't taken, he hanged himself and died. It's important to understand we should test the spirits in a place where there are competing forces of good and evil. If we read 1 John chapter 4 from verses 1 to 3. We must never be rationalizing advice when places are set up, like in the workplace or in righteous works. We can only rationalize in the sense of be fact-checking the advice, doubting the advice, when there are certain places where evil has come in, where Satan the devil has taken over. And once again, we have to use our spiritual justice to be able to dissect such things. It's very important that we keep this in mind. Now, I'm going to go into some advantages and disadvantages to taking advice and not taking advice, respectively. Well, because advice helps build both our spiritual understanding and troubles that might come in the future. Because we take advice, we do not have to learn such things the hard way. We don't have to go through a lot of troubles in our life. That's one reason why taking advice is good. And you have to have a good attitude towards advice in order to reap the rewards of taking advice. We can't be rejecting the advice or wanting to feel too proud even though we don't have any advice to give. If we read 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 4, but rather we should be like David, who stated, "I will bless the Lord who has given me counsel. My reins also instruct me in the night seasons." He was blessing God for giving advice. We have to have the ability to take advice from God. If we read Psalms chapter 119, verses 9 to 11, David the psalmist had stated, "Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed thereto according to thy word. Thy word have I hid in mine heart, that I might not sin against me." It's very important that we understand we have to have a good attitude to advice, because when we take advice and instruction from God, we will be blessed. "I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Open thy mouth wide, and what? I will fill it." But what are the disadvantages to not taking advice? Well, when we are stubborn against advice, what I said before is just flipped over. We will have to learn everything the hard way because, of course, we feel too proud to listen to anybody else. For example, because Pharaoh did not take God's advice through Moses to let my people go, that was the advice. Whether he understood it or not, that was the advice. Because he didn't take it, he had his kingdom destroyed, Pharaoh's firstborn killed, and everything else happened. There was so much shame in the process because he did not take that advice. Because King Ahab did not take the advice of Prophet Micaiah, who of course God was speaking through, to not go to Ramoth Gilead to take it from the Syrians, he ended up being killed in the process. Even though Jehoshaphat was trying to say, no, Micaiah is a good prophet, because Ahab was like, oh, I just hate Micaiah because he always prophesies against me. He never has anything good to say about me. It's always evil. He rejected his advice, obviously, and he would, like I said, he was killed in the battle that he fought against the Syrians to take Ramoth Gilead back to his kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. The Israelites did not take God's advice. If we read Psalm chapter 107 in verses 11 and 12, spoken through Moses and the prophets, and that was why they were killed. Many of them were killed in the wilderness and further throughout their history, as prophets would come like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and they would rather be slaughtered or persecuted, or many other bad stuff would happen to them because they did not take God's advice. If we read Jeremiah chapter 42 from verses 1 to 22, we also see the same kind of idea. Jeremiah had strictly told them, do not go to Egypt, because Jeremiah had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen if they did. But because they, although vowing to God and to Jeremiah that whatever God says to you, we're going to take it to heart, they didn't, because the advice wasn't necessarily in the favor of their minds. They had other plans and other stuff that they wanted to do. They went to Egypt, and their destruction was horrible. All because what? They did not take God's advice. God laughs at people. He gets the last laugh, remember. So anytime we do not take his advice, unfortunately, he has to satisfy himself and his anger pacified by also having his own turn to laugh. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Psalms chapter 2 verse 4. See also Psalms chapter 37 verse 13 and Proverbs chapter 1 from verses 24 all the way to the end of the chapter verse 33. We have to understand the fact that when we do not take God's counsel, like the Pharisees, the counsel of Jesus Christ, if we read Luke chapter 19 from verses 41 to 44, but we want to persecute the person, offer our own side of the advice because of our pride or our ignorance or whatever it is, we will not do well. And once again, the hierarchy of obedience is not necessarily just a thing that we use to cancel advice or take it, because sometimes people who are not necessarily above us can render good advice that we have to take. Like Joab, who when David had said, go count the people, because Joab had the spiritual understanding to know that this was rationality, because David was collecting such information for future military decisions and strategies. Joab tried to advise him that, please, don't do this. This isn't good. But David stayed with his decision and said, go count the people, my friend. Just do it. And because of that, Joab still had to go ahead and remove some people, removing the Benjamites and stuff. And if not for what Joab had done, the punishment that David would have got would have been very bad. It was only because Joab had a spiritual understanding to remove some people that he saved David from that judgment. Rejecting advice for whatever reason, especially when we don't process it out through, is not a good idea. And there are many disadvantages or drawbacks that come from that as a result. In the time that we're living in, the last days, there are many things that are happening. If we read Matthew chapter 24, verse 21, Jesus Christ had stated, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. The kingdom of God has been set up, and because of that, God and Jesus Christ know where the world is going. They know where the future is coming, the desire of all nations, if we read Haggai chapter 2 and verses 6 and 7. Therefore, they're going to be the ones offering all the counsel, and we have to have the ability to accept it, because it is God's counsel that will stand. If we read Isaiah chapter 46, in verses 10 and 11, Isaiah the prophet had stated, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure, calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. See also chapter 55 from verses 8 to 11. Daniel chapter 4 and verses 34 and 35, and Isaiah chapter 14 verse 27. Because God can assure that his counsel stands. If we read Proverbs chapter 8 verse 14. We cannot be listening to the advice from the beast because of their blasphemy, which God said they will do for an appointed time. If we read Revelation chapter 13, verse 5, for children to be disobeying their parents, for people to not believe in God anymore, believe that there is no God. If we read Revelation chapter 13 and verses 3 and 4 and stuff, we should not take that counsel, but we should take God's counsel because He knows the future. And when we study the Bible, we come and have an understanding on what God is doing, and we can follow suit with what's going on. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 16 and 17. I hope we now have an understanding on what counsel is, which kind of counsel we should be taking, making sure it's going against Satan's will and obviously not going against God's will, and how we should welcome it. But like I said at the beginning of this video, there are many Christians in this world who do not want to take advice, but they want to be the ones giving all the advice. However, if we Christians want to change that, how? Well, anytime we're giving advice that is good, we should almost instinctually take the advice as gold. Not let pride destroy it, because pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better is it to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Proverbs chapter 16 and verses 18 and 19. When we get good advice, we should accept it as gold, as silver, things that are very valuable, and we go ahead and apply it. We should never be wanting to say our own, always wanting, anytime we're getting advice, to also be the ones giving advice to the person who is giving the advice to us, but rather, we should always be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. If we read James chapter 1 verse 19. Neither should we be like King Ahab, who always wanted advice to be in his favor with Micaiah in 1 Kings chapter 22. He didn't want advice that would make him have to change his preset plans because he was set in his ways and stuff. No, we should never be proud, but we should be humble and accept advice when it is good. For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. Romans chapter 12 verse 3. And I choose to end my talk on discussing the very important subject, welcoming wise counsel. To conclude this episode, we are once again going to hear a tune that some of us might enjoy. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something most importantly. Please try to subscribe, share this video, and click the notification bell if you have not already to be notified when we make future videos just like this. And we have to understand, just like the title of the tune I just played states, God will make a way. God can only make a way to those who take His advice. In Psalm chapter 25 verse 9, David the psalmist had stated, "The meek will He guide in judgment, and the meek will He teach His way." Thank you for listening.